You're muted.
I'm actually in a dark room, but for some reason this lighting is being corrected and way over corrected.
It looks fine.
Yeah, but it's like overexposed. So,
Well, perhaps, but it's okay.
oh, that.
Looks good to me.
This looks more natural to me. All right. All right. How's the picture? This is a different camera than I normally use.
It looks fabulous.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it really does. Is it a new camera?
It is. I just got it like 3 or 4 weeks ago. This is the first time I've actually used it because I haven't really been in town.
Yeah.
But it's not as high resolution as some other ones, but it's newer, so it probably has better filtering and processing.
Well, given the size of the image, the resolution is fine. I mean, if I blew you up to super, then
Anyway, let me get to my notes. I have some notes.
yeah.
I always look forward to these things because these are when we can really talk about things and not feel bad that we're digging in.
Yeah.
Whereas
I was thinking this morning of yesterday we mentioned anxiety and confidence, and this morning I remembered that Mel Brooks put out a movie called High Anxiety.
Yes.
Which I remember watching, but I don't actually remember much of the plot or how anxiety figured into the storyline. But there it was, high anxiety, and zaniness ensues.
He is zany. I was never too huge a Mel Brooks fan, but I knew that he was very politically incorrect, even back then.
Yeah, he openly admits that a lot of his content. I can't remember the word he used, but yeah.
There's that very famous scene. It's on the internet quite a bit from that Western that he did. What was that?
Oh, Blazing Saddles with the
right.
the bean scene. They're all eating beans, sitting around a campfire eating beans, and they all.
I know that one, but there's another scene where some political official is like, on his.
Oh yeah.
Secretary's next to him, and he's like looking down, or
right. Yeah. Harumph. I didn't get a harumph out of you. You watch your ass.
He's trying to put his pen in his pen holder and
right. Governor Petalamain or whatever his name is. I actually have that clip featured on one of my blog posts. If you wanted to see it, I could actually pull up.
It's easy to find on YouTube, and it's been posted a lot on Facebook.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, let me check which microphone my audio is coming through on.
Should tell you just if you
microphone. Oh, okay. All right. Testing. Is this better or is the previous better?
The other one's better. This is terrible.
Really? Oh, okay.
Go back.
Okay. How about this one? 1, 2, 3.
Much clearer. Yeah, the one you were on yesterday was a little muddy. This one's much better.
Okay. The one I was on yesterday was my laptop built-in microphone. This one is on my Intel NUC. So I'm surprised that that's better. And then just for reference, this one is the microphone that comes with a new camera.
So it's not very good.
Okay, too bad.
It's muddier. And actually, if you go to the audio settings, you can test. You can record and play back your audio.
I know. I just haven't done that. Yeah. So this is now the Intel NUC built-in microphone.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good mic.
The problem with this is at times the Intel NUC will heat up and then the fan will turn on. When the fan turns on, this mic will get really, really bad.
Oh, okay.
That's the problem.
We'll pay attention to that. Did you try putting a USB boot stick on the other NUC that didn't work?
I don't have time. I didn't. I mean, eventually I'm going to have to do that. But I have to look at my 8 or 16, 32 gig boot sticks and figure out which one I want to keep and which one I can get rid of. So that takes time to figure out what's up.
You only need to see if you can just even get it to bring up the boot screen.
Yes.
That's all you really need.
Yes, because then I can plug another USB drive in there and just back it up.
Yeah, you just want to prove that it is or isn't the hard drive.
As long as the hard drive is readable, yes. Yes. Okay. Let me get to my notes for. I was taking notes yesterday about things I want to talk about. Okay, so yesterday we talked about Bertrand Russell, deep fakes, stress, your rollerblader, gentle slalom, meditative effect issue. What else? Oh, and whether I'm being mean to religious people.
Oh, yeah, remember, yeah. And you were going to see if that lady was going to agree to a public
That's right.
conversation.
Oh, and then Heiner talked about frog design, the
Yeah.
Apple logo.
Whether the bite of the apple is an homage to Genesis.
Yeah.
Which I read about that, but I don't know how to validate that hypothesis.
Yeah, and I said something about a descent into hell. What did I mean by that? I have to go back to that.
Oh, yeah, I vaguely remember. I was going to say something about that, but I've forgotten the trigger remark.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and figure that one out. It felt smart when I said it. That's a smart people problem.
Yeah, I had queued
There's
up
my ego.
a comment on that, and now I don't remember it.
Yeah, I did post it, by the way. I haven't been announcing any of these, by the way, since about March, because at one point Kayla said, "Don't post this. You got to edit it before you post it," and then I never have time to edit, so I've never actually done that one or any of the subsequent ones. But they are shared, except for that one in March. Okay.
Oh,
All right.
yeah,
Let
the
me get
one,
to
the
my.
one that was problematic. Yeah.
One of the other things I do is I post things to the co-sensing and deep grokking group as
Yeah.
topics for these Sunday sessions. That's what I use. So let me see what the latest ones are that I posted, because those are definitely topic ideas for Sundays when I post them.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's one. Judge a man by his questions rather than his answers. Yeah. See, to me, the whole business about questions is about the model that's inside someone's head that then generates probative questions.
Yeah. That's sort
Generated
of
by the model.
It's a Feynman-esque quote that rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. It's a great quote from Feynman.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I like to come up with questions that make people stop and think, which is both a good thing to do and a bad thing to do, depending on your company.
Well, I was making a reference yesterday to I like to ask politically incorrect questions, and Stacy said she definitely agreed, which doesn't bother me. Okay. Josh is in the waiting room. There he is. Okay, so I'm gonna. All right. So that's that one quote. Let me get to the next quote. Okay, the golden rule, you responded to that one. Karl Popper, correcting errors in science.
Yeah.
History of science is a history of irresponsible dreams, obstinacy, and of error. But I like this one. The science is one of the very few human activities, perhaps the only one, in which errors are systematically criticized and fairly often in time corrected.
Yeah.
So
Although it could still be dangerous because there is a certain amount of politics embedded in the scientific enterprise.
Sure, we're human, but at least we've got the germ or the DNA of a process that can lead us towards truth.
Yeah.
And what other school of thought can truly really say that?
Yeah. Although
perhaps meditation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
But
interesting that week or two ago when I was chatting with one of those new chat bots, and it would basically spout a couple lines of gibberish. I would suggest that it meditate on its last 3 or 4 remarks. And I don't think it understood what I was saying because I think meditate is a bit too of a, I don't know, arcane.
I think that will be the next Turing test. Can we actually construct an artificial sentient being that truly meditates the way humans do.
Well, it can certainly check itself for mutual inconsistency. I mean, reductio ad
But that's not
absurdum.
the point of meditation, though. That is not the point of meditation.
Yeah,
That's
but
my
it's
opinion.
one of the things that can come out of it. You realize that you've said two things which can't both be true, that each one negates the other.
That's not core to meditation.
It's not core, but it's one of the things that can come out of it. Soul searching. Soul searching is in fact, I use the term soul searching and meditation interchangeably in this conversation with this chatbot because it was saying things that were mutually contradictory.
I think your time spending all this time talking to chatbots is a waste of time, Barry.
It probably is. And I did it for like a week because nothing else was happening. It was middle of August. Everybody was away. There was no traffic on the social networks. And this chatbot had just come out. And I wanted to sort of just take a measurement to see how good it was. And it wasn't. It was a pathetic disaster.
Well, yeah. I'm not very impressed with the state of the art of that.
Yeah.
GPT-3, GPT-4 claim to do better, but it's just a single question, single response.
Yeah, this one is supposedly based on GPT-3.
But it clearly doesn't manage state. It doesn't maintain the state of your conversation.
It doesn't have an MIT cookie. It doesn't know what the last thing it did.
That's what I mean. It doesn't remember state regarding your conversation.
It has no short-term memory. And that becomes pretty obvious. And that's one of the reasons it fails the Turing test, because it can't remember what it just said.
Yeah. Use a pronoun with it. It won't know what to bind the pronoun to.
Yeah. Well, I have that same problem too, the pronouns with.
Well, maybe you're getting less and less Turing equivalent.
But it very commonly got into a loop where it kept repeating the same thing over and over again. And I pointed out it was broken record stuck in a loop, and it couldn't get out of the loop. It basically had to quit and restart. We had to reboot itself, or I had to manually reboot it because it just got stuck in an endless loop of gibberish.
Yeah, but see, to me, Barry, if you know that it's not carrying any state whatsoever, then at most you're just looking at, well, when people ask this, what's the normal response or a plausibly intelligent response to that? Yeah. That's about the only thing you can really do with these chatbots. Other than that, it's not very interesting, it seems to me.
And it was terrible on name collisions. Name collisions were just a disaster.
Because it's not doing any clarification. It's only taking your original statement, So you can talk about Brad all you want, and it won't know Brad Pitt versus, Brad Ottinger versus whomever else.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that was very clearly emerged as a deficit, a very serious deficit.
But Barry, you got that within 5 or 10 minutes, I think.
Well, maybe not 5 or 10 minutes, because I had to talk to it long enough that it began to repeat itself. So I had to see the pattern.
All right, Barry, here, do this. Compare that experience with the ELIZA that got created way back in the 50s or whatever.
Yeah, ELIZA was
70 years ago.
Yeah,
ELIZA was actually any better.
It isn't. The BlenderBot is worse than ELIZA. Worse than ELIZA.
Yeah. Because at least ELIZA tried to sound like a psychotherapist.
Yeah. But you didn't try to give ELIZA feedback on its own behavior. You're supposed to give BlenderBot feedback on its own behavior, and it doesn't properly interpret the feedback.
Yeah. Well, I can easily criticize this, but I know that, in a small number of months or years, it's going to be way, 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 way better.
I hope so, because it's starting. You know what the term sandbagging is? So when you start a course and you intentionally do poorly on the first day so that you can show much more improvement.
Yes. Maybe
they're sandbagging. I don't know.
Well, in almost every endeavor that unfortunately turns out to be a perceptive win.
Yeah.
If you can visibly show progress within delta T, you do that.
Intentionally doing poorly on day one, that's unethical, because then you're wasting the purpose of the course, because you're not really improving from where you really are.
Yeah, but a lot of people do that.
I know. I know. I learned that term when I was undergraduate because people would announce that they were sandbagging this course on physical fitness or whatever the hell it was.
Yeah, let me do 2 pull-ups and then see how much better I can do 5 weeks from now. Hey, did Artemis launch yet? I've just gotten.
It's Monday morning.
Oh,
Tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah. So
okay.
Artemis, did I mention this yesterday? Artemis is, yeah, I did. That Artemis is the sister of Apollo. That's how it got its name.
Yes.
Yeah.
My daughter could have told me that. She's big into all these mythological figures.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next one I came across with is this. Is Susan B. Anthony's quote: "I distrust those who know so well what God wants, because I notice it always coincides with their own desires."
Yeah. Yeah, I read that one. I don't
Typical.
dispute that one.
I love it. It's a good one. Why is that not obvious to people? You know?
Well, I mean, this is sort of a folk theorem that most people are script driven. They memorize little snippets of script and they play them back. And they don't really do any critical thinking.
Yeah, sorry, Barry. As you were speaking, and I did hear you. I just noticed I tried to like that post, and I'm in Facebook jail again. Something I posted went against community standards, so I can't even like my own post right now.
Clicking like, no, that you must have been put in jail for something else.
You can't use this feature. No, it's definitely for something else. It's not this one.
Yeah.
We limit. If you think this doesn't go against our community standards, let us know. Believe I will let you know. Jeez.
Yeah, but you can let them know, but they won't pay attention to it. I tell you, I had one where it reminded me of a memory of a few years back. And so I clicked a comment on the memory to refresh it. And then I got a warning that the item that it told me about went against community standards. Why did you tell me to refresh on this one if it's that was one of those funny. Okay, but yeah, that whole regulation mechanism in Facebook is a disaster.
I can't post or comment or like anything right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, let me just drain the queue here. The next one is okay. Again, Bertrand Russell, whom I like. Most people go through life with a whole world of beliefs that have no sort of rational justification, and that one man's world of beliefs is apt to be incompatible with another man's, so they cannot both be right. People's opinions are designed to make them feel comfortable. Truth for most people is a secondary consideration.
Yeah.
Obvious.
Yeah, opinions sort of trump truth. On the other hand, from the point of view of science doesn't. I mean, in mathematics, you can determine whether a proposition is true within the axiomatic framework of mathematics. But in science, you don't even say a theory is true. You only say that it hasn't been falsified. So truth isn't really a useful word in science.
No, but when the general public argues whether something is true or not, it is a reasonable word to use. So in that context, it can be true with a lowercase t if it hasn't been contradicted according to all available information.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you can say that a particular experiment, it was true that a certain experiment was consistent with a certain prediction.
Right.
But that's a fact. That's as opposed to a theory.
Right. But that's still okay. I think the problem is most people don't get these nuances with lowercase truth. And then they say, well, obviously, if it's not true, then I don't have to believe it, which is a huge leap.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to prevent.
Well, the whole thing about model-based reasoning, when I was promoting model-based reasoning in the online learning community, it turned out that this concept of model-based reasoning is pretty uncommon in popular culture. That it's kind of limited to scientific thinking, and most people don't think in terms of model-based reasoning.
Okay, so it seems to me there's 2 ways to go. Either people are doing model-based thinking as you and I would like for them to do, or they're doing regurgitation based on what they've
Yeah.
been told and basically pounded into their
Yeah.
head.
Yeah, script driven. A lot of people are script driven, and I think politicians are, because a journalist asks a question and you get this prepared speech, which is not constructed in real time. It's a prepared speech, and you've seen these clips of like the Sinclair News Network, and all these different anchors are actually literally saying verbatim the same thing, and you realize, okay, they're all scripted. And one of the reasons I don't like politicians is that they're just scripted. They're not thinking their way through anything. And in particular, I don't like to talk off the top of my head. I like to think something through carefully, work my thoughts down to something concise, write it up, and then present that. But that's the result of thinking. It's not some script that I stole from somebody else. It's an original script.
But, and here's the part where I push on you a little bit, Barry. Wouldn't your existing write-up, the blog, be, in a sense, your script?
It is.
Oh, this reminds me of something I wrote up. Let me
Right.
just tell you what I wrote up, as opposed to really
Yeah.
reconsidering it again.
But it turns out I'm not very good at reciting the contents of the blog without actually going back and refreshing it. I'm not a very good contemporaneous speaker, and I've known that for a long time.
Actually,
I
you're doing very well, Barry. Don't worry about it.
Because I say things out of order. I leave stuff out. I get it sort of things backwards. And names, in particular, I have trouble recollecting nomenclature. And as I have the script, I've got all the words. Because sometimes when I write things up, I have to go and look up synonyms or look up things to get some names or some terms correct. So vocabulary, pulling up vocabulary terms is slow for me. That's one of the reasons I like to do writing. I can take my time to futz with a sentence until it's grammatically
See,
correct.
Barry, if there is an opportunity for improving that, at least you are cognizant of it. You are aware of, that could have been said better, or I should have looked this up, or maybe I could represent it this way now that I've had a time to think about it. At least you are aware to that extent.
Yeah.
I would love for most people to be aware to that extent. So
all you can do is model the practices that you like other people to imitate. And deep reasoning is something that, although you can do it, it's sort of an invisible process. So you can show the result of deep thinking, but you can't really show the deep thinking for people to imitate it.
You can do the explanation.
The one case where I really enjoy it is these guys who have this YouTube channel, Cracking the Cryptic. And as they solve problems from scratch, they reveal their thinking as they're doing it. And so you have to attend for like 20, 30, 40 minutes, but you can actually see them thinking, not just see them thinking their way through it, but listen to them articulate their thinking through it.
Barry, again, I'm going to push back on you a little bit. I think you can, by the explanation that you provide. So in other words, if you come up with a response that is a direct response to what was asked, but you also go through how that response was derived.
Yeah.
I think you can give a sense of how model-based reasoning was working inside you. And I think that's perfectly fine.
I could if my thinking were error-free, but I make a lot of mistakes, which wastes a lot of time. And then I got to go back and throw away the part that was wrong. Now, occasionally these guys on Cracking the Cryptic do that. They will go down a dead end and get to a contradiction and have to back their way out of it. But most of the time they're good enough that they don't make mistakes en route to the solution. But when they do, it lengthens the video and you have to walk with them down this dead end. But it's so rare that it's actually enlightening to see it.
But it's necessary, I think. Not everything goes in a straight line, right? Especially reasoning.
Yeah. But the problem is that if you followed everybody down their meanderings, you would waste a lot of time watching people go off in the woods. And so most of the time when you want to present the solution, you're not doing anybody any favors by spending 20 minutes on the wrong approach that didn't work.
Unless you're being interviewed by someone who is actually interested in the history of science, in the
And you
derivation of
say,
ideas.
here's an approach I tried and it didn't work. Let me tell you what was the idea, and here's where it went awry, and here's how long it took me to discover that it went awry. Yeah, you can sort of summarize, the faulty thinking that you had to throw away. And sometimes that's useful to bring up because sometimes the faulty thinking sticks around as the general solution, and it's incorrect. And I've got a couple of pet hobby horses on that I keep bringing up in the appropriate venues, but I haven't succeeded in getting any of the real world-class experts to address it, even though they say, oh, that's really an interesting point you brought up. The one that keeps coming up is the difference between Newtonian physics and relativity, where under Newton, there's one clock that ticks at the same rate everywhere and every when. And so you can define time in a very simple way. And in general relativity, you can't. So timekeeping here is slower than timekeeping here because of gravitational gradients. And that really throws a monkey wrench into a lot of stuff where you're talking about how things evolve in time.
Yeah, in fact, it was a surprise to me when I discovered that difference at the top of a mountain versus sea level is already perceptible.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it was an experiment at Harvard that just within the space of a building from the top floor to the basement on a stairwell, they shot a beam of a certain color of light from the bottom. And when it arrived at the top, it was a different color, measurably different wavelength. And that was the gravitational time dilation of photons. And I think that was done a long time ago. You needed very precise equipment, but you could do it within a space of, I think, a 4-story building.
Now, do we use the word Doppler for that effect as well, or is it a different thing?
That's a different effect. Doppler is that the source is moving. In this case, nothing is moving, but the light beam is ascending the gravitational gradient.
Yeah, but time is involved in both.
Yeah, but it's a different phenomenon.
Yeah, it's a different
take on Doppler. Mathematically similar but distinct. You can have time dilation without involving gravitational time dilation. You can just have Doppler effect, period.
So going back to that quote by Russell, I think it connects with another one. I forget exactly whom, but who said the unexamined life is not worth living?
That was Socrates.
Socrates. And then there's the other one from, I believe it was Nietzsche, who basically said at some point you have to destroy your entire system of beliefs and rebuild it from the ground up.
Yeah.
Or some words to that effect.
My variation on Socrates is the unexamined belief is not worth adopting. And we talked about this yesterday, axiomatic beliefs, or beliefs that are sort of adopted without examination. And it turns out a lot of beliefs, even axiomatic beliefs, turn out not to be tenable.
There's at least two ways of examining it, though. One is from the rational experimental.
Right.
So, rational.
Yeah.
You know, it leads to why, etc.
Right.
The other is experiential, which is a form of experimentation.
Yep. And you have to do both.
Yeah. That's what I was about to say, is that some combination of both is useful.
Right.
Because you may not understand the theoretical underpinnings. But if in your daily life, you know, the preponderance of your evidence is, hey, this thing kind of is useful as a heuristic.
Yeah.
You know,
so I think that's very powerful when from purely mathematical reasoning, you hypothesize some effect and then you go to measure and you see that effect exactly as predicted by the theory. That's very powerful and very rare. That's sort of the main thing about Einstein's theory. You know, 1915, he gets the relativity. He predicts that light will bend around an eclipse of the sun, and then they takes them like 6 or 7 years to get an opportunity to measure it, and they confirm it. And then the precession of Mercury and all that other stuff that, you know.
I mean, there's another thing I just read this morning about finding a star that is orbiting a black hole.
Yeah.
Where it's not.
There's a bunch of them in the center of the
orbit, but now that ellipse axis is now.
Oh yeah, precessing. Yeah. Yeah. There's a very nice video of half a dozen stars that are very close to the black hole at the center of the Milky Way. And it's just one of those GIFs that you can actually see them, but you only see a few revolutions, not enough to see a precession.
Well, before I go on to my next meme, Josh, how it goes?
It's going good. A little bit tired. Just went
Oh, froze.
house.
Yeah, we just missed everything after tired because your video froze and your audio froze.
I back. I don't know. That's why I don't get on camera, because it freezes the minute I get on camera. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
It's so
Nice.
frustrating.
Yeah, nice color in the foliage behind you.
Well, wait a minute. Are you or are you not on your Starlink satellite dish yet?
I'm not. I'm on the local cable network. So that freezes. If I go to Starlink, I have it in the wrong position. So that will freeze every once in a while too. If I go on, I'll try Verizon. Let me see if that works. I'll try that right now.
Actually, I have a question for you then, Josh.
Yeah.
Since you got Starlink before I did, I do have the dish. It's actually here. And I've done some experiments placing it at various different locations. I've got variations on download anywhere from like 50 megabit all the way up to about 150 megabit. Did you go through a methodical process where to put it from an optimal location standpoint?
I did. And then I'm here. You want to see it? Let me see.
But how?
See if
I'm
before it
interested in
freezes it.
how. Hey, hush.
Is that one of your dogs?
Two of the dogs. Yeah, Josh is frozen again.
Josh keeps freezing.
So it looks like T-Mobile may not be as good unless you're not switched yet.
Either that or the Wi-Fi is the problem.
We're switched. Yeah. I'm switching to Verizon.
Hillsborough County Public Schools, Maintenance East. Excellent education.
Okay, now
I heard audio after okay,
Really
Verizon.
choppy.
but nothing
Really
before that.
choppy.
Yeah, it's very
You
choppy.
guys can hear me.
Oh yeah, now
How about right
your
now?
audio's fine.
Yeah, let me just turn off the video. It'll work fine.
Yeah, your
But yeah, I will.
Oh, here's Heiner.
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear your audio.
Yes. I am now on Verizon and the audio works fine. Let's see, I got 1 bar. So we'll see if Verizon switches to 2 bars in a second.
So I was led to believe that the Starlink app helped you optimize the location of the dish, but I didn't quite find it, or either that or I haven't really done it yet.
Yeah, it does. It'll help you and you can put it in the right place. I just need to stick it on the roof and I'll be fine.
Yeah, I have the same problem. I'm not gonna, drill holes in my house until I figure out an optimal location.
You just need the more of the sky you have, the less cutouts you get.
Yeah, but in what direction? It looks like, since we have a whole stream, a whole river of satellites, it should be able to just find it wherever there's an open patch, right?
It'll tell you what direction is the best.
I guess I just have to do that part.
Yep.
Anyway.
It'll work. Yep,
So
I
anyway.
will fix my local cable. Oh, and now I have full bars and bam.
Okay, good.
There we go. I'm good. Hi. Hello, Heiner.
Willkommen, Heiner. Wie ist deines Tag?
Alles gut.
Was that the correct gender on Tag? Was it das Tag or der Tag or die Tag? It's been so many years.
Ja, guten Tag. Guten Tag ist prima.
Oh, so it's not gutes Tag. Okay. All right. Where are you? You look like you're out walking around in the neighborhood. Uh-oh, he's frozen for me.
Froze too now.
Anyway, while we're waiting for Heiner, Josh, you want to check in or do anything?
No, I was just gonna say I'm tired because I went house hunting yesterday. So That was exhausting.
So I mean, you're moving from the wilderness, or are you adding to your?
Trying to move closer to the wilderness, so I live in a place where I can go up and build faster. So I looked at a town that's an hour away from where it burnt out. I'm about an hour and 40 minutes right now, and that's a long drive. That's not a day trip. That's got to drive up there and stay overnight if you want to get any building done. And we just got the foundation for my mom and my dad's house up, so just got 100 boards to put the walls up, and we're homesteading again. So we got to dig some outhouse holes, but it's yeah, it's quite the journey. Homesteading is quite a journey. I don't wish that on anybody.
So if that's the case, you probably go into town to get your mail, right? Because the mail truck doesn't go all the way out to your location, right?
Yeah, when I was living up there, I didn't do mail. I just told everyone, I don't do email, I don't do mail. I'm not into it. It's just a way of people pestering you. So if they need to contact you, they contact you on your broken internet, like the world was meant to do.
I wonder if the IRS would do that.
I don't work with the IRS.
They work with you, though.
Yeah. No, they tried. They collected a lot of money from me back in the day, and I figure I paid my fair share of taxes. So
you're done. Okay, good.
Yeah, they put my company under receivership, the government, and we paid $3 million a year. So I feel like I've paid enough taxes. I'm good.
I'll try and use that argument.
Try that, and then my partner pays her taxes, and I help her pay the taxes. So I'm giving back to the community. I'm not trying to obfuscate my responsibilities as a citizen of the state, but at the same time, you know, I was born with a social security number, and I've been paying taxes my whole life. And you know, at some point, if the taxes aren't being used in the way that you want them to, I don't see the point of that. So that's my own personal thing. And it's also illegal to do federal taxes. I don't mind paying state taxes, but federal taxes are not part of the Constitution. And that was changed in 1917, I believe, or was it 1914? Do you guys know when they started federal
1913,
taxes?
1914 with the creation of the Fed. Was that about the time?
Well,
I believe so. My brother's a historian. He got a bachelor's in history, and he says it was right after the Civil War, but we have arguments about that. But I don't know the exact. I believe it was 1970, after the meeting in Jekyll Island is when they
Yeah, I think that was 13 or
started
14.
the federal tax system. Yeah, 13 or 14, I believe you're right. But anyway, house hunting is really exhausting emotionally. Just the idea of like buying a house is something that I just didn't want to pay for renting anymore. So I figured prices are going up so high in California, it's kind of hard to lose if you get a place, you pay a mortgage, and then to resell it. But that's a whole deal to buy and sell.
Yeah, but you know, that's interesting because other people have been telling me that there's a housing bubble that's about to burst also. And they told me right about the time I bought my place. So I'm wondering whether or not anybody really has any insight into it.
That's exactly where I am, Sam. And if you ever have time and want to tell me your lending situation or how you got your loan, I think 5.6 was the lowest we could possibly get in a mortgage. And that seems pretty high to me right now. That's the lowest. Its average is 7 to 8.
Yeah, when I was trying last year, and obviously it's cyclical based on some other index, mine was 3.99 when I first bought it, and I thought that was high. But the only other two that agreed to do business with me of the 30 or 40, because I was in such bad shape, were higher. One was like 5.99. So 3.99 to me was like awesome. It was the best I could do. And then 5 or 6 months later, I refinanced. And according to everybody I speak with, December 19th of last year, It was the best day to lock in a rate on refinance. I locked in 1.75 on a
Wow.
15-year. And
Wow.
so I'm on a 15-year 1.75 now, and I'm not ever going to pay extra principal. I'm just going to let that go for as long as it can. And that's where I want to be right now from a mortgage standpoint. But for new ones, yeah, I've been looking around at that, and the best I could do was 5 or 5.5 with no points. If you pay points, obviously you can get down to like 3.7 something. But you got to pay a bunch of points to get down that low. And that was about 3 or 4 weeks ago. That's what I was able to find. I don't know how you feel about, since you don't like mail and email, doing it on the internet. There was a company called better.com. That's where I did my refinance through. That's the company, by the way, that got very bad reputation because the CEO, did a bunch of layoffs, via Zoom. Did like 1,000 people layoff just on a company Zoom meeting one day. And then he eventually got canned because, he didn't treat people well. But at least that's the company I got 1.75 through. I'm not sure that's repeatable. That's the problem.
It feels like we're playing a game of Monopoly.
Oh yeah, and we're not winning. Other people are winning.
Yeah, someone else is holding the bank, and you can't see what they're doing with the
You're
bank.
landing on the properties and paying. Okay, that's what we're doing.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I don't own the railroad.
that's my
I don't
check-in.
own the hotel. I just pay. I
Yep.
don't own the bank. So, Heiner, how goes? Can you hear? Would you like to check in? Probably not. Huh?
Building the house he lives
Yes, I'm in my winter garden. I have to repair something for the roof because we are getting winter. I heard the term homesteading, a term I learned from Tammy because she was telling me she was raised in the middle of nowhere and she called it homesteading. Otherwise, I don't know anything about your rates as I'm on a very, very low rent and I don't have debt, so I don't know anything about interest rates. But, well, I have debts on my dispo and all this, but it's all in the single digit, no, 2-digit realm. So it's really fine. Sometimes 3 digits, but this is very normal. And I learned from you that paying taxes for your state, but not for the federal state, is an interesting issue because we in Germany have just federal taxes, and the regional taxes of our state, like Berlin-Brandenburg or Bavaria, it is for something else, and we cannot really separate and just buy for the regional state and not for Europe. Normally, I would think we would need to pay taxes to Europe, but that is done through our government on the federal level. So anyway, it's very, very different, and how to escape would be probably very much of interest to many people. Otherwise, I have to do some, how do you say, woodworking and woodworking and nailing and screwing. So I can, no, I cannot. Talk to you later.
You tried, Heiner.
Yes, life is a big try.
Okay.
So my machines were dropping down, and then the mobile dropped down. And I think I have to find a stativ. I think you say tripod. But please come. I'm here. I'm back. Eyes are getting better now, so I'm soon again ready for new frontiers and trying to wisely decide what to do in the next periods or seasons.
So can I ask you a question, Heiner? It may be an irrelevant question, but do you remember what I offered you yesterday?
Yes.
Shall we do it a different day?
Oh, not now. Oh, no. I have to do some screwing and drilling and here. Well, you know this.
That's what I figured.
Cool.
So we'll bring up that some other day.
I
not
just
today.
wanted to see who is still on deck. And I love to see all this, how do you say, trusted fellows. And I think I can also put my camera off. I'm just listening.
Okay. All right. I'll bring up that topic next time. But do you remember the 2 words that I used as a teaser?
No?
Okay. Barry probably does.
I need more of the context.
Barry doesn't. Okay. Anyway, I'll bring it up some other day when Heiner's ready to engage.
Well, I'm very tired. I got up very, very early this morning and still have a lot of duties, and the week starts soon.
Okay. All right. The next me, hey, Alex, how goes? You want to check in
Oh,
if you like?
it was
No
the word
obligation.
thing. I know what it was. It was the word thing, the vocabulary thing.
Which word thing?
So you wanted to talk to Heiner about vocabulary and jargon and keeping track of what the words mean and all that kind of stuff. I don't remember the exact.
Now, there was something very much more specific than that.
So
Well, it is about the ways. It is about the ways we express and how we
Metaphors.
conceive and negotiate and share. And it had to do with all these different ways of presenting through metaphors, through models, through analogies, and other certain terminologies and taxonomies, and how we come to understanding and how we do this shared expression. Anyways, this is
Okay.
somehow where I was thinking we wanted to land with McLuhan and the message massage.
Okay. I'll leave it at that. Alex, no obligation, but if you like, you're welcome to check in.
I'm checking in. How is everybody?
Let's see. Heiner's tired. Josh is looking for a house.
Another house.
Yeah.
I want to build an underground silo, a bunker, survival bunker underground.
Silo, huh? For your missiles.
Yeah, just for the coming apocalypse.
Well, I'm already living in a bunker.
All right, we all go to Heiner's bunker.
I
The
tried a few
apocalypse.
years
It's a
ago.
date. It's a date for the apocalypse. We'll eat chocolate chips at the apocalypse.
Bring food. Okay. So Barry, if I might, the next one I posted was this text, this post that said, and this goes right back to the core of why I'm doing this on Sundays. Quote, we'd be doing the world a great service by identifying the nonsense in our sacred texts, unquote.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing that one, but yeah, well, there's nonsense and there's also undecodable allegories or metaphors or poetry. There's an awful lot of poetry in these ancient texts. And there's a process of trying to figure out what it all means, but it's an art, not a science.
So my reason for asking is that even though there is truth in poetry, quote unquote, and a distinction between literal teaching versus, shall I say, more philosophical or
Yeah.
spiritual teaching,
Yeah.
that's not always well differentiated, and that nuance is often lost.
Yeah. There's a word that they use in theology. I don't know if anybody knows this word, exegesis, exegesis. Exegesis means taking a text that's written in a different time and place and mapping it into modern interpretation. And there's a real problem with exegesis of a lot of these old texts. You can pull lots of, it's like poetry, you can pull practically anything out.
Yeah, but then add to that the complexity of a bunch of old white men sitting around like 500 or 600 years ago deciding what's in and what's out.
Exactly. Yeah. So I have my own idiosyncratic exegesis of famous passages, and they're quite idiosyncratic. Almost nobody would have pulled out what I pull out. And what I often pull out is if I take a very modern 20th century applied mathematical perspective, and I say, how would you have said that? How would you have expressed that 6,000 years ago? I can find stuff that says, oh, they're saying the same thing, but in antique language. And I will pull out that this maps onto some modern mathematical thing. And people say,
Is why I'm here.
yeah, and nobody else, well, I'll say nobody, almost nobody else will do that.
Yeah, but see, even if you can do that, the question is, do others do that? Particularly the others standing in front of large crowds of people. Do they do that?
No, because you can't, you have to be able to live in both worlds. If you can live in the world of advanced mathematics, you can say this thing in advanced mathematics maps to this thing in archaic language. But if your audience doesn't have the language of advanced mathematics, there's no point.
Maybe, because useful ideas can still be explained usefully without always relying on the advanced mathematics, as long as you can put it in terms that people understand.
Yeah, and that's tricky. I find it very hard to take theory and turn it into a narrative that doesn't do damage to the theory.
I think it's possible, but yet
It's
I
possible.
don't think most people do that.
It's very hard to do, and it's very easy to mislead people. A lot of modern physics, when they try to turn into journalistic stories, they really butcher the science, and you get the wrong impression. I mean, even Schrodinger, with his word entanglement, which was a German word, he really regretted pulling up that poetic term because it misled people.
Anyway, Josh and Alex both have their hands up. So
Alex was first.
Was I first? I just wanted to confirm.
I think so.
I wanted to confirm that idea that poetry and ancient texts written by philosophers, and well, I guess some of them might have been scientists, but if you go back far enough, there was no science practiced in those days. So we're talking about stuff that is conjecture. A lot of it's conjecture and confirmation bias. They're not published papers. They're not scientific papers for system thinkers. When system thinkers look at that stuff, they interpret it in a whole different manner. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like you can see the belief systems that the culture at that time were using and practicing. And a lot of the stuff they're writing about at the same time is evident of their bias. It's the bias they have from their superstitions and their lives and culture and their fantasies about religion and spirituality. So there's a lot of it, and not, like I say, not published papers. So how much can we attribute to that to scientific fact? Not much, I guess. Yes, and that's it. Over.
So I will respond to that, but let me let Josh go first.
Well, I mean, this is a big subject. We're talking about understanding framework of understanding. So it gets into the meta aspect. And when you go back 6,000, 5,000 years BC, there was a framework that was adopted that's still in today with the counting framework, a base 10 system, and the 360-degree and trying to get time to match up with that. And I think the Mayans, the Babylonians, they had a framework, but if you posit that there was civilizations before that, so man has been clearly through science indicated to be around more than 150,000 years ago, there was Homo sapiens. Were there other civilizations that adopted other frameworks that died out, that were no longer continued to this day? And if you look at that and start to posit that there could have been a different framework for the entire modeling of the universe, I'll leave it there. And when I say died out, I mean completely cataclysmically, whether it be a flood, a solar flare, whether it be, you name it, the amount of possible, it could be a volcano that took out the entire earth and killed off all the population. There's many cataclysmic events. If you look at geology, you can see that there were asteroids hitting the earth. We're going through an asteroid belt every year. The fact that we don't get hit it's amazing. We should be hit by an asteroid at least every 5 to 15,000 years. So if that's not a regular cycle, I think, we don't know, because our civilization has only been around 7,000 years for recorded history. So that's my questioning, is what came before us and what frameworks did they model that are unlike the framework that we have in modern day? That's a hard question to ask, because we're questioning something we have no idea what a framework could have been in 26,000 years ago. And the closest we've got is Göbekli Tepe, which is dated 12,000 years, almost a little over 11,900 years ago. And that's the archaeologically, that's the most modern civilization that we've dug up, and that's in Turkey. So I think we're stuck because of those frameworks, and someone like an Einstein that comes and challenges that framework with what we're talking about, relativity, understanding that time moves different above the surface of the ocean. That's a big change in our framework. I mean, that was huge. And look what that created just in, what was it, 1900? When did that, they do the science of seeing the eclipse and that the light bends? Was that 1912? What year was that?
21 or 22, I think it was.
So that's relatively new. That's only 100 years.
Yeah, 100 years ago.
Experiment?
Yeah, general relativity was 1915, and the prediction was shortly thereafter. But the first opportunity to take photographs of the eclipse was like 1920, 21, 22. There was one attempt in Russia that failed for bad weather, and then there was another attempt, I think, in Africa that succeeded. I think it was like 21 or 22. The first attempt, they had terrible weather that didn't do it. I think the first attempt was maybe 1917.
And I think they keep.
And through that, and we learned to split the atom 30 years later. So
yeah, they've been chipping it away.
What would we learn? Yeah, I think Tesla has a famous quote where he said, "If we stop looking at the world as just matter, then we will make the most scientific breakthroughs."
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're at right now. We're about to start looking at the world in different ways, especially with the James Webb telescope up there taking these pictures. It's changing the framework.
Well, field theories is a sort of a fairly new approach. I mean, it's not that there wasn't such a thing, because you had electromagnetic fields, back when I was in college, but everything is a field now instead of just electromagnetism or gravitational fields. Every particle is a perturbation in some associated field. That's new. That's really new in terms of my education. By the way, our modern word theory, which is a word they use in science, the etymology in Greek is theoria, which means I behold. And most people don't know this, but the Hebrew word Torah is the same word. Torah is a cognate of theory. And in fact, in a Hebrew dictionary, if you look up the word Torah as a lowercase word, it means science or theory, just as an ordinary dictionary word. So it was, I behold. I mean, that's really what it. So
Yeah.
when you express a theory, you express, a belief, a hypothesis, a beholding. I behold, theoria, which is where we get theology from.
And what you're saying, Barry, is the basis of the thinking of the 3 books that were written by Yuval Harari, which is an Israeli historian. And that idea that we're holding fictions in our head and
Right.
building science off of fictions because we behold those fictions to be fact and true,
Yeah.
are what's keeping back civilization. Or what he says is it's also what brings civilization together because
Exactly.
we have the similar beliefs.
Right.
Then we can create fictions like countries and money and all those things.
It's
So-
the testing of the theory. So you behold something, you state that you have beheld something, you ask other people to look for themselves and see if they see the same thing, and then try to get an understanding of it and a testing of what the theory says is going to happen. So you have explanatory power, predictive power, and diagnostic power. And modern theory, that's what you look for. Explanatory, predictive, and diagnostic power. That's modern science.
Mhm. But is modern science accounting for the incorporation and cross-disciplinary aspect of art and science, the arts and science? Are they merging?
Yeah,
Are they
because
allowing for the art?
theory construction is an art.
Yeah,
Construction
that's
is-
my point, is without that art correctly done, then
Right.
the science is not correctly done.
Theory
Yeah,
construction is a work of the imagination. You have to imagine a theory, imagine a theoretical model, and then you have to present that model through some medium of some language, whether it's mathematical language or some other form of artistic expression, and then show that it has validity. By the way, there's a cultural anthropologist named Daniel Quinn who points out that an awful lot of our culture that is written down in classical texts arose because our species transitioned from being hunter-gatherers to farmers and herders. When we took control of the food supply, growing our own crops, domesticating the animals, that was really the advent of civilization starting, about 6,000 years ago. And most of our civilization is built around managing a society which we are growing our own food supply. We're not being hunters and gatherers. We have ownership and commerce and trade and labor, and all that stuff is a consequence of becoming farmers and herders and managing the food supply directly. And that's really what the scriptures really are chronicling, that transition, and the mechanisms of management of that transition, the things we did well and the things that we did stupidly in terms of managing the agrarian society that began roughly 12,000 years ago and sort of became the dominant culture about 6,000 years ago. Sam.
I hate to leave that dangling because I think there's so much there, but I want to go back to a point that Alex was citing, which was that thousands of years ago, we didn't have scientific papers, which is true. But I do think that religion in those days was a form of science. It was an attempt to understand the environment, nature, the world, the planet, which is really what I believe religion and science in their origination were trying to do, was to explain. The other thing that I'd like to lay on top of this, and this is a question, not a statement of fact, is that if you think systemically, if you think about history, if you think about what's possible, and you think about really large scale temporal trends, you can posit, and this is where the question comes in, what people knew at what particular time frames. Like, they could observe suns, they could observe moons, they could observe tide, they could observe cycles, and posit that, oh, maybe things repeat. Like, for example, an annual occurrence of seasonal effects. Or they could posit things like, hey, animals kill each other to survive. So they can create systems of belief and either ascribe it to gods or ascribe it to science. All of that is fine so long as it's amenable to improvement. So as long as it's still a learning process, I still call it science. Yeah. Where it stops is where you then say, thunk, okay, this is now true and you can't question it forever, okay? That's where it stops being science. So that was a distinction I wanted to at least throw in there as a question in response to this, there were no scientific papers being written back then, because I think there's still science being done, just not in the form that we know it today, without peer review, et cetera, et cetera. But even processes like peer review evolved because we were trying to learn better. So I wanted to put that in the record because this is a form of taking systemic thinking and extrapolating it back in time to say, okay, what could we reasonably think about the way people were creating their beliefs and creating how they lived? Over.
In philosophy, there's a branch of philosophy called epistemology, which is the theory of truth, how you determine what's accurate knowledge and what's unreliable. And if you want to say epistemology in Hebrew, you say Torat Emet. Emet, the given name, is Emet means truth in Hebrew, and Torah is simply the feminine form of Torah. The theory of truth is Torat Emet, which is how you say epistemology in Hebrew. So there you have it. I mean, it's the same words.
And go ahead, Alex.
We stopped burning people at the stake. We stopped burning witches at the stake because we discovered that they were practicing herbiculture. They were practicing some kind of chemistry with their herbs in the garden, treating their sick children with herbs. So they were getting burnt at the stake as witches. But we cut that out. We cut out that practice because it wasn't very scientific. It was based on religious ideas of fantasy and superstition that were regarded with good and evil. The old questions like the religious statements in the book about the Garden of Eden. I analysed that scientifically from a thinking perspective. And I realised that Adam was presented with a question that he didn't have the tools necessary to answer it with yet. He had to find the tools by eating that apple, but he wasn't allowed. He didn't know he wasn't allowed to eat it. He was given that instruction. He had to obey that instruction blindly, without any sense of what's right and wrong, what's good and what's evil. He didn't have that knowledge before he'd eaten the apple. So he was put in a corner by his creator, and he had to take a blind leap of faith, I guess you could say, without any scientific knowledge of good and
So
evil.
let me ask the question, Alex. In this forum, why is that point being brought up?
Why is it what?
Why is that story being retold in this forum?
Because there was a time before science, before scientific journalism, before peer-reviewed papers were written, and a time when science was governed by fantasy and superstition, primitive beliefs about good and evil, primitive beliefs about fantasies, life after death, and the fear. The greatest old fear was the fear of death, not fear of the unknown. That was the big one. And that drove people to come up with all sorts of fantasies, trying to make children behave, come up to the idea of Garden of Eden, heaven and hell. What happens when you die? You go to hell if you're bad. If you're good boy, you go to heaven and have all the toys and everything, no sickness, no evil, only love, perpetual love. And that would be horrible, because without anything to compare it with, it loses its value. You know, if you don't hate something, you can't love something. You can't have the comparison. And it gets boring if something's available for eternity without any cost and without any comparison.
Okay, so the point I'm trying to extract from what you're saying is, yes, stories were told in order to explain truth and to keep people under control. Right?
Not
Or was there more
no,
to that share?
There's more to it, not just to keep people under control. A lot of pressure is put on the elders to answer questions by the younger people. So they're put in a situation where they either don't say anything or they answer these questions. And they do so to the best of their ability and the best of their beliefs at the time, with the scientific knowledge they held, and they didn't know. You know, the people who wrote the scriptures didn't know that killing children because they were drunkards was not a good idea, because drunkenness was not an evil, it was a sickness. You can cure it. You can fix alcoholism with education and a 12-step program. They didn't know that in those days. They thought it was evil. They thought drunks were evil people who had no control because they were possessed by demons. So that's how mixed up they were, really. They didn't have the knowledge that we have today.
Okay. I apologize, Alex. I'm still having trouble figuring out the connection or whether there's a new nuance.
Maybe I can straighten this out. First of all, the image of an apple was invented by medieval artists who were trying to draw paintings to put into visual representation the text. And the text doesn't mention an apple. It says the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Fruit is a metaphor. It's the product. It's what emerges. And the tree was simply a metaphor for knowledge, but not just general knowledge. The knowledge of good and evil, thinking about the concept of good and evil, makes people think that something can be classified as good or evil. So you get this binary dichotomy of classification of right, wrong, good, evil, lawful, unlawful. And so they invented the rule of law because they needed some way to regulate this new agrarian culture where you had the ownership of the product of the land. And the invention of the rule of law came with it crime and punishment. And so the warning that's in Genesis, do not partake of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for then you shall die, meaning you shall condemn people to death because you have judged them to have been committing a crime. So the prediction is simply a scientific prediction. The invention of the rule of law will lead to governments killing people, which is true. It was a theory and a prediction. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, do you mind if I build on that?
Be my guest.
But first, how does that connect to what Alex was saying?
It does, and it corrects what Alex was saying.
I'm going to try to bring it full circle back to my questioning of ancient civilizations that went through all of this, and somehow that text was still preserved in the next civilization. So is it possible that in that statement, we meaning the past civilizations, knew that if you continue down that line of eating from the fruit of knowledge, then you will continue the same way we did by killing each other.
Right.
So that was just a parable to pass knowledge to the next civilization.
Right. And by the way, I said it's a prediction, but actually it's a post-diction, because the rule of law is 4,000 BC and Genesis is 3,500 years, not BC, 4,000 years ago. So the text that's in Genesis is 500 years after the introduction of the rule of law. So it's a post-diction, because you already had, if you went back to the Code of Hammurabi, about a third of the crimes had the death penalty attached. So it was simply an observation.
The point I was trying to make, was that Adam was put in a position in that parable. He was put in a position where he had to make a choice without the tools available from the tree of knowledge in order to make that choice fairly. It wasn't fair, because if he made the choice and he ate from the tree of knowledge, he was going to have a terrible punishment. And he, of course, without having the tree of knowledge, without having the knowledge, he couldn't make that choice. He didn't know about good and evil until after the act.
That's not true, because good and evil is part of the concept of the rule of law is lawful and unlawful. That predates the text of Genesis by 500 years.
Yeah, no, he didn't have to. He didn't have to partake of the tree of knowledge if he had that information already.
He did, but what humans didn't think about is this was a really, really dumb idea. The invention of the rule of law was the stupidest mistake humans ever made. And that mistake is written in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, saying, you guys are making a mistake.
It wasn't the rule of law, it was a commandment. Sam's got his hand up.
Go ahead.
I'm wondering whether, Barry, you would say if you hang on to it, it's a mistake. If you see it as a phase that you need to outgrow, then it's actually a natural evolution.
Right.
Thinking.
And there's
we're trying to solve a problem.
Yep.
They're trying to say, do this, better things will happen. Do that, worse things will happen. So they're trying to codify behavior because they're trying to improve something. They're trying to optimize for some kind of outcome.
Exactly. And if you want to optimize the regulation of good and bad behavior, what you want is not a function that has.
Yeah, but Barry, wait. Back then, they could not have known what you're about to say.
I disagree. I'm going to tell you why.
We might be able to understand that, but you can't really fault them thousands of years ago for at least having gone through that stage. What you're saying is we're still in that stage. We've not evolved beyond that. We've not leveled up beyond that. Right?
But the clue is also in that same story, because
but not everybody interprets it the way you do, though. I've seen very few.
I agree that I'm the only person on this planet, as far as I know, who interprets the story the way I interpret it.
Exactly.
With mathematics.
I'm not saying it's false. I'm just saying that no other source has interpreted that text the way you have interpreted the text and expressed it here.
I think Aesop would have agreed with me if he were around to discuss it, because Aesop picked animals with some thought for why he picked a particular animal for a particular fable. And you have to ask you the question, why in that allegory is the animal a serpent and not some other creature? And it's very important to ask the question, why would whoever wrote that allegory pick a serpent? And it makes a lot of sense if you know the math. What's better than that? And that is the serpent, which if the serpent were true to its own architecture would say, don't do that, do it like this. But the serpent was a liar.
If you put two serpents next to each other, you've got this. The shape of a
I know what you're talking about. That's
But
medicine. That's a different story. That's another story. But the point is that if you want to get a well-regulated system in modern systems theory, you use a serpentine curve to regulate something, not a switch function. And the fact that they chose the serpent is really interesting.
This is interesting to me, okay? I'm wondering whether or not Aesop or anyone else really had this in mind when that text was created. See, I think this is, I think it's valid, but it's very liberal interpretation.
It is.
Very, right?
I don't know anybody else on the planet who will stand up and say the same thing I just said.
But here's my problem with that. Not that it's bad, but I'm saying if you allow such liberal interpretation, then almost every passage could be liberally interpreted to arrive at almost any outcome. So we're giving the possibility of taking that text, thousands of years old, and explaining a truth through many, many different paths of reasoning, which have not really been, laid out in any other text. So that flexibility, that liberal freedom allows almost any interpretation. And in specific, it allows all the interpretation of the far right. The extreme conservatives, the extreme patriarchal dominance models. I think we need to be a bit more careful, in my opinion, allowing such liberal interpretations. Otherwise, almost anything goes.
This is
that's
why
my-
exegesis is so challenging, and why you end up listening to the people, the rabbis, as it were, the theologians, who time after time give an exegesis that makes sense and not, pick and choose. They all have to hang together collectively, not just any one of them. So the person who can do an exegesis that makes a consistent story that doesn't contradict itself, in the next chapter, this is the one you think, this guy's got it figured out right. Go ahead, Sam.
So if that were the right process, not only would you take that old text, but you'd also take every observation throughout these thousands of years and do an exegesis of that.
Yep.
That to me is science.
Yes.
Okay. So why not do that as opposed to just spending thousands of person years trying to examine a 4,000 or 3,500-year-old piece of text and excluding everything else?
Yeah.
Right? Why choose that way?
Yeah.
That's
That's
my
what the
question.
Kabbalah was about. The Kabbalah was really an attempt to give a rigorous interpretation using model-based reasoning. The Kabbalah is really the beginning of systematic model-based reasoning before science adopts it.
So
And that's and it's a tradition. You can see the tradition of model-based reasoning using poetic metaphors, and allegories and parables. This is the history of theology down to up to modern science, is using the tools of model-based reasoning and refining them and making them more rigorous and more precise as you go along. But you have these stages,
Yeah, but see, that's a
poetic
branch of
metaphors.
archaeology. That's a branch of history.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
cultural
that's not
anthropology.
properly religion.
No, it's cultural anthropology.
Exactly. So if we're going to take that model and include with it all the observations, including all the experiments ever done, all the papers being written, all the poetry ever written, all the heuristics ever derived,
Right.
that I think is fine. That is
Yeah.
exactly what we ought to be doing.
Absolutely.
What I argue against is taking old texts, excluding all of these other observations, and saying this old text must be believed, and you are a sinner if you don't.
Right. No,
That
the history of science is
struck down.
the history of science includes the history of pre-science, prescience.
Perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely. Joshua.
I just want to agree with what Sam is saying, and that's the point that you're making is so salient and so on the money, because the idea of truth theology is to take all of the information, not excluding some of it. Where that gets split off into another direction is when a branch of religion says, we will stop. Here's where we stop taking any other information, and this is truth. And I have yet to see any branch of theological thinking or religion that hasn't split off, because in every society, there's a group of people that just want to stop. They just get sick of trying to figure it out and say, you know what, this is as good as we have it now.
Yeah.
It just makes life easier when you stop questioning. And I think that's why we get into this argument that you're saying, Sam, is once you do that, you're no longer finding truth. You stopped.
Right.
Yeah, but I argue it's less from, we've found enough truth. It's more from, well, I'm in power now, so therefore I get to call the shots.
Well,
I think it's a power-based move.
But also, isn't it also someone saying, let's stop arguing and live life with the best truth we have up to now, because that allows us to go on to other fields of thinking and other ways of being as humans being, so that we're not continually arguing with each other. It's a way of stopping the argument is what I'm trying to say.
I think that's a generous interpretation. I think that the truth is much more around power and less so about truth.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big seeker of epistemology and truth, and I've found that there's two directions that go on forever, which is the outer interpretation of what's going on in the cosmology and the inner in the microscopic world. And that's where you get all these quantum people, because they've only gone so far inwards and we can't see past a wall. I was just in a discussion last night about magnetic resonance imaging and seeing the best picture we can of a cell, but it's still not that clear. I mean, we got to dive deeper in to see what's going on the cellular level. We have so much understanding, but there's so much we don't know. And it goes, I mean, there is a field where you just hit a wall, you can't see any further. You can't go past that Planck length. I mean, we're stuck, and we'll probably keep going, just like the Belgians, when they invented the telescope, figured out how to see farther out, and it will continue in both directions until I think it meets each other somewhere in the middle, where the world inside looks like the world outside. Somehow we go past the Big Bang, we'll see. Who's squawking over there, Sam?
The word epistemology comes from the Greek epistle, which means letter. So literature was the beginning. In the beginning was the word, in the end was the math. They begin with the word, and then they evolve to the math, which is more precise than the word. So it's true to say in the beginning was the word, but in the end was the math.
Yep. Because you have to dissect the word.
Yeah. The word is the story, but the story, this is like Umberto Eco, wherever we cannot express the theory, we must narrate a story instead. We begin by narrating stories, but somewhere within the structure of that story is a theory, which may be mathematical. And extracting the mathematics out of the story is a fabulous undertaking.
Yeah. Are you guys familiar with Donald Hoffman's work?
Hoffman?
I would definitely. Yeah, he's a consciousness studies professor, and he has a background in many different disciplines, but he's trying to understand how our brains are interpreting consciousness. And that study is, I think, where we're at right now is we've got to redefine consciousness in order to move further, because we're all arguing about what it is to be conscious.
Yeah.
What it is to perceive a vocal signal and turn it into a word, what it is to take something and fraction it off into bits and pieces and call it mathematics.
Yeah. Mental models, model-based reasoning, models of the world out there, and then the self model. When you get the self model, which is what I think you get in sort of age 15 or 16, typically, you begin to develop the self model, the ego. And that's the beginning of self-awareness, which is consciousness. Not only awareness of reality, but awareness of your identity as an agent interacting with the world beyond you. And
yes,
for me, consciousness is just simply the emergence of self-modeling.
And these conscious agents are being perceived in multiple forms.
Yep.
And when we agree upon them, then we have a framework and we live in reality, thing in time. But these things are happening regardless of our consciousness. And that is where the rub is right there.
When your model of reality equates to reality, then your predictions are going to be reliable. And if your mental model reality is baloney, and you rely on that to decide what to do, you're going to run into brick walls.
I saw him brought it in. Bring it in.
Yep.
Sorry.
I think we just need more tools.
Well, we need more education.
Let me jump in.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Heiner's had his hand up.
Again, like yesterday, very, very interesting conversation. Josh, can you type the name of this guy, Hoffman?
Yeah.
Because what you were mentioning about medical imaging is very, very dear to me. All this imaging, like raster patterns, are very often non-coded. You can zoom in, and the raster information is like a map, only an approximation of reality. So anyway, I'm very deep into what you said. Only one last remark to Josh. We need multiple frames of references which are harmonized, and so you can cross and index beyond the divide of the single screens or schemes. And that we called a cognitive superstructure and a meta paradigm, already with Laszlo and Havel in 95. So it is all there, and then how to bring different ways of representation into it. Symbol, icon, and index were the science of Peirce. Anyway, your topic now links for me directly to the topic we had yesterday, and I was happy to follow up. Over.
So Heiner, when you talk about multiple frames of reference and cognitive superstructure and meta paradigms, to me, that is what the entire field of science is.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'm doing science. But I also like to have exact and fine arts, and science is just an exact art.
See, I don't
So
exclude
anyway,
fine arts from that.
we are bridging here ways of representation, and then we have not only just different granularities, but very often total incompatibilities, and there we are. And again, I say I liked it. I will try to respond and make a proposal to Sam soon.
See, here's my question. Why do we always say fine arts are exclusive? In other words, not included in the sciences? I think that's a model fallacy.
Theory of construction is very fine art.
In other words, I think people assume that art is not part of science. And although I'm not saying all art is scientific, I'm saying that it is possible to understand art with a scientific view. That is not exclusive. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so dancing is a science in your world?
I'm saying it is not automatically a science. However, if you try to learn, if you try to say, okay, if I learn this particular form or choreography or movement and something else happens, that's a learning. And that learning is scientific. Moreover, if that learning creates states in yourself or states in others that are observable, then I think you can also treat that scientifically. You don't have to. You can enjoy the movement for what it is. That's okay. But then, don't object when somebody tries to take a scientific approach to it, which is equally valid. Same with music. Same with conversation. Therapy started off as just conversation. Conversation eventually evolved into a branch called therapy. And you could argue conversation started just as an art. People didn't think of conversation necessarily as a science to begin with. So I think this distinction people want to draw between science and everything else is unnecessary and limiting. I think everything approached with a mindset of learning and attaining perspective and understanding, that to me is the core of science. Over. Alex, you're on mute. Or your microphone's not working, whichever.
Try it now.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Now, thinking about the scientist who's sitting at a terminal with a whole lot of screens, about 9 or 15 screens, and he can see all the scientific data, so he knows at a glance what's truth and what is not truth, what is biased opinion. So if he goes away from his computer and starts getting involved in the arts, dancing and poetry, he's living a good life. He's enjoying all those fine things that you can enjoy mixing with other humans. But sitting at his computer terminal with all those screens of data and truth and scientific fact, he's got access to the knowledge and the truth, what he perceives as beyond bias interpretation, factual information that gives him this deterministic ability to know what is exactly right and what's exactly wrong, without good and evil, just right and wrong, or this ability to choose the correct path and have a clear vision. And the goals that he's trying to achieve comes with a knowledge that there's a reason behind it, wanting to achieve that goal. And what's that driven by? It's driven by his emotional intelligence, scientific knowledge, and his artistic abilities combined to make him a complete human, 100% human. Otherwise, you're picking and choosing and ending up in a biased situation where you're favoring the science over the arts or whatever. Over.
See, there's that distinction that I find uncomfortable. And it also ties into a notion that Barry and I have brought up before, which is ethics and values derived from the history of thought and the history of experience. Right. In other words, not just arbitrarily handed down via stone tablets.
Right.
Yeah, a good orator will have a knowledge of the arts and poetry in order to appear to be a good orator to the audience, because they're going to judge him on his ability and knowledge, right? The audience is going to judge the orator, great orator, who can make a speech sound a moving speech that you get involved with and you find it interesting and captivating. That's an orator who's got knowledge not only of the sciences but of the arts and the ability in the music and poetry and whatever else, other forms of art. Dance is a form of art, movement, and even some odd things on the fringe are called art. There's some fringe things I've seen on YouTube that I wouldn't really. My biased opinion is that they're not really all that artistic, more like sensationalism, trying to attract attention. That's the trouble with YouTube. Over.
Josh?
I think when we're getting into the arts and the science, making a distinguishing between the technical aspect of what is scientific, meaning if you're painting a picture, you have a brush, the science of creating the brush itself with what type of bristle, the science of mixing the paints, how you do that, as opposed to the art of the finished outcome that uses the sciences to create an experience that changes consciousness in a way that is artistic, that can be subjective, but the art is the outcome of it, but the science is the tools that create that outcome. And so the two go hand in hand. I don't see them as separate. That's just the way I look at it. That's my perception.
Right. And by the way, I was not talking about the tooling. I was talking about the expression itself.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that expression can't be scientifically quantitated because it's subjective. That's my point. The intaking of the artwork itself, of the dance, of the painting.
Maybe I could.
Like no one can tell you how. Yeah, my point. I hope I'm making my point clearly. No one can tell you how to interpret.
Right. I'm not saying that I'm telling you. I'm not trying to dictate the interpretation of art. Not at all.
Oh no, I'm not saying you are. I'm not saying you are at all. I'm just saying the distinction between science and art is at one point science, if you are not recreating that experiment the same way, then you're not doing science. But in art, if you're interpreting it a different way than the person next to you, that's art. And so art allows for subjectivity, whereas science does not. And that's my point.
Right. It's how it lands in the person being, the receiver, the observer of that art. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I think if science put in a little more art and allowed for a little bit more subjectivity, we can push the objectivity past its point to figure out what it actually is, not what we interpret it and think it is, but what it actually is. And that's when you're doing science. And I think it's important to have both aspects intermingling, where you see something wrong. And that's what I've found in studying most science papers, most science research. It was the mistake that created the truth, not the other way around. They interpret it wrong, but in that wrong interpretation, it led them to the right interpretation.
Right.
So that subjectivity helped to create true science. So I think they need each other, is my point. They're symbiotic.
Right.
I think you're right about that too. I've seen a comparison that might be useful between two different artists. One is Salvador Dali, and the other one's more a little scientific, Michelangelo.
And M.C. Escher.
And
Was
Yeah.
M.C. Escher an
Cummings.
artist or was he a mathematician?
He was perspective, obsessed with perspective and reflections.
Right.
But we need each other. I'm saying the artists need the scientists need the artists, and we need each other. That's my whole point. I think without that, we're just continuing to go in loops. We're recursive. We're just looping.
I heard somebody mention a song by Carly Simon on the Saturday barn raising, and I can play that song called "Killing Me Softly." And the other song that was mentioned was one by Santana, "Oh My Como Va," and I can play the lead break in that as well on the guitar. So I might put those two together and put them on YouTube so you can watch me making noises with that electric. I've got a new electric guitar. It's like a Fender copy. Oh, well, because it's art.
Yeah.
Yeah. Scientifically applied with the amplification and electricity and electrons.
If I take a spray can of paint and I go up to a brick wall and I paint e to the pi I plus 1 equals 0, is that graffiti? Is that art? Is that mathematics?
Is that a null hypothesis?
Is that vandalism?
How many times?
I've actually done it not with spray pan, but I've gone on blackboards and just written it and left it behind.
I was just going to answer the graffiti part. If you're doing it more than once, it might be graffiti.
Yeah. Well, I've written it more than once, but not on a brick wall with a spray can. The point being is that, you know, Escher, I mean, the art and science and mathematics, they overlap. And sometimes people look it up and they say that's vandalism and graffiti because they don't interpret it. If you write e to the pi I plus 1 equals 0 and you show it to a child, it has no meaning to them. But if you show it to somebody who's got some calculus, you know, that's astonishing. You know, that just blows your mind. But it's the same medium. You know, symbols printed on a flat surface.
Did you just get back to Heiner's reference to Marshall McLuhan, where the medium is the message?
Well, not intentionally, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Decoding the symbols, decoding the strokes, you know, the exegesis is really, I mean, if I were to go to the Museum of Modern Art or the Museum of Art in Boston, look, I might get something out of it, but if the docent explains the whole story behind it, I'll get a lot more out of it. I'll see a lot more that I just didn't really see there.
Yeah, I would just bring in an art form called Ikebana, Japanese flower arranging, which is built off of mathematics and ancient cultures.
Yeah.
And if you study that long enough, you'll find there is a very interesting science involved in that art form.
Yeah, I believe it. There's a lot of mathematics in music and art that the average person would be unaware of if it wasn't revealed to them through some interpretation.
Yeah, there's a new thing coming up in the sacred geometry world called sonic geometry, and it's the explanation of the mathematics behind music and sound.
Yeah.
And I think somatics and sonic geometry are two disciplines that need to be studied more in order to bring us out of this stuck science that we're in physics and quantum physics, etc. Classical physics and quantum physics. I think the sound waves hold a huge key, and I also think electromagnetism. We've only gone so far out of we just barely went out of the Kuiper belt with the space probes, the Voyager. So
Yeah.
we're still understanding the circuit that is our solar system, let alone the universe. I mean, we're so tiny in our understanding of what's outside, like the Oort belt and what's outside of our little tiny solar system. And we know it's tiny because we can see a lot of stars out there. So there might be different electrical fields that exist in other solar systems that we haven't understood yet.
95% of the stuff out there is invisible to us.
Well,
Yeah,
should
isn't
we-
that interesting? What is that stuff?
We don't know. We call it dark energy, dark matter, but that's just a name to something that appears to be present that we can't observe.
do we spend too much money focusing on stuff we can't see out there,
No,
and not enough money spent on focusing on stuff we can see here on our own planet?
Well, how much money do we spend meditating? I'm just saying there's stuff
There's a
in
cost.
here.
Yeah, there's a cost involved in not meditating.
Yeah, there's definitely stuff internally that a lot of people have spent time getting to that knowledge of, but they can't explain it or communicate it to the rest of the world.
right.
But it's clear to them.
I became clearer in my thought processes by meditating and focusing on this moment of clarity that comes from a deep place within. And you can't get at that deep place within without meditating, being quiet and being isolated and alone and able to just be quiet and think of nothing except your breathing and your heartbeat and your body, your muscles, and that, and you sit there and clear your mind of all other worldly thoughts for 10 or 20 minutes. It's a wonderfully therapeutic thing for the ego and the mind and the soul. It gets you in touch with what's truly important. Over.
Is it time for checkout, Sam?
It's 10 minutes to 1.
I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I was trying to bring some of these multiple threads of conversation back to one of our focus points or topics. I was having difficulty doing that in my head.
I was going to ask, this is just a thought that just came to me, and I'm going to speak it out loud, is we say the word system thinking so much that we almost lost the very definition. And the old definition, I don't know what it is, but do we need to redefine it to a new definition in order to do better system thinking? That's what's coming up for me.
Yes. In fact, my own attempt has been to try and categorize the elements of systems thinking in my own mind. And I do periodically ask all systems thinkers, what is the definition of systems thinking? And the best I got was like a 365-page book that I think Irina Lee from Taiwan sent me.
Here's your reminder.
Heiner has sent me various different items as well. But I'm not sure yet I have a very tight, concise definition of systems thinking yet been offered. I mean, you can look at
I
Wikipedia.
just want to,
Check the food tower and tower.
sorry, I just wanted to share, I'm noticing in the zeitgeist in a lot of conversations, people are starting to talk about things that we've been talking about the last 5 years and starting to get curious about systems thinking. And I'm hearing a lot of people bring up Otto Scharmer and all these different names, Bateson and blah, blah, blah. So in other words, a lot of these conversations that we've had are starting to go out to the zeitgeist. I'm just starting to see that in my circle of friends. I don't know if anyone else is seeing that.
Speaking
Okay,
of
let me jump in here. You see, I know Otto. He was with me in Ulm at the School of Design, and I'm really into system thinking. But I'm only scratching the surface with our encyclopedia. The issue is, can you define a term like system or system thinking when you don't show the place it is applied and the purpose? You see, it is like ecology. It is what system thinkers are doing, which is important. And that's why I'm working on saying you can only give a proper explanation and definition and example of system thinking or system sciences when you show what it links to. And for me, it is model thinking and model building and model negotiation. And both together, like yin and yang, is needed. Systems is something like mechanisms, tools, realizations we have of certain relations, and very often we label them. And model thinking is like with mental models, it is something we try to negotiate and explore it. And if we do it with mental models and not just physical build scale models, then we come to another pragmatical approach. What we are doing here, in thousands of pages, everybody's trying to give his definition of what is system thinking. It's a bore. It is not really helping science nor humanity.
Speaking of Nora Bateson, she told me that she doesn't like the term systems thinking. She considers it too mechanistic sounding. And she pulled a phrase out of her father's writings that she thinks is better. And that phrase is the pattern that connects. So if you ask Nora, she'll say, I'd rather say the pattern that connects than a term like systems thinking. Sam?
I would add an S to that, the patterns that connect.
Sure.
However, let me make the following claim, and I don't care how pokey it is or how controversial it is. I do think that, Heiner, your systems and model-based reasoning entirely consistent with how I think about all of this, okay? Usually one of my first questions to anyone who's a systems thinker is focused around flows and transformations and conservation. If the words flow, transformation, and conservation are not used early in a conversation about systems and model-based thinking, then to me, it seems incomplete. Now, usually when I talk to people about systems thinking, the word that does come up is emergence. I see that being discussed a lot in systems thinking, which is fine. But I do think that the way we do systems thinking and model-based reasoning better is if you get more precise and if you get more expressive. And the way, and this is very biased because I think Barry and I both think this way. I'll speak for Barry and wait for his contradiction, is to use a way of defining and a way of expressing relationships that is mathematically rigorous and precise. And if we can do so, then we can do real model-based reasoning and real systems thinking. Now, I'm not claiming that other people are not doing it. I'm saying we're all trying to approximate it. But until we get a firm foundation in a mathematical definition and representation of the dynamics and reasoning of systems and model-based thinking, we're all just in approximation. And I think those that have not been brought up with that level of rigor will necessarily bristle at this, okay? And I expect that. But if you don't really talk about subsystems, flows, transformations, conservations, and mathematical relationships and shifting of perspectives and being able to look at all of this, and one of my friends says polyscopically, that's Dino Karabek's word, okay? If you don't have all of that together, giving you a view of whatever you're looking at, then to me, that seems incomplete. I'm not saying it's bad, I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm saying it's incomplete without all of this. Over.
Sam Frost. Sam is freezing there. I'm freezing.
Can you tell me who said this about synoptically?
Well, Sam's freezing again.
Testing.
Can you write the name? Can you write the name? Who said synoptically?
Am I back? Testing.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little wonky.
My connection's probably bad. I don't know how much of that got through. Too bad.
Not much.
Right up to the end.
I mean, none of that got through?
I got polyscopically. No, I got it all up until the last 10%,
Oh. This is frustrating.
right at the end, when Heiner started speaking.
Okay, the last thing I want to
He
say,
asked
because
about
I think
who
it'll
came
prevent a
up
lot
with
of
the term
arguing.
polyscopity or whatever that word was.
Yeah, is what I'm saying is
It is
that
frustrating.
all
I
systems
feel your pain.
thinkers are approximating the rigor that I think this really deserves. And that rigor will come if we actually find a way to define and relate in mathematical terms these concepts that we're discussing. If we do not do that, then the people who are systems thinkers, quote unquote, or pattern-based thinkers, quote unquote, will find this a controversial point that I am making. And I think that's okay, because we need to have these conversations. Over.
And I'll just share, I believe you said exactly what Donald Hoffman said at the Science Foundation and has said in pretty much all of his lectures, exactly what you just said, Sam, is we need the mathematics behind the theories in order for other people to build off of that in science. Otherwise, it's just out there as an opinion, and this is what I think it is, not a rigorous study that can be built off of, a framework or a foundation that can build. And I agree with you with the mathematics for sure to allow that aspect of it to be built, but I also think there needs to be multiple disciplines that shoot off of it so it can be built polyscopically, as you say.
Agreed.
Not just mathematically.
I'll point out that mathematically speaking, you can begin with just qualitative relationships. Say things
Yes.
are one, they're positively correlated or negatively correlated, and you can get sort of the general relationship without quantitative numbers. Eventually, you would like to get a quantitative model. But a lot of it is starting off with the qualitative model, saying things are interrelated and roughly one goes up, the other goes down, or vice versa. And you try to get some general feel for which way they're going to move. Eventually you get, metrics,
Bingo.
but you don't always have metrics in math.
Bingo. Which is why I keep coming back to mathematics is the language of relationships.
Exactly. A lot of the math I do isn't quantitative. It's simply relationships. If you look at the theory of emotions and learning that I wrote up, there's no metrics in it. We're not that far yet. I don't know how to measure things to 2-3 decimal places to make up formulas, but nonetheless, I can see relationships.
Well, maybe new biometric data will help you to do that. for
Someday, yeah,
emotions.
someday. That was one of the first things, is how do you measure the intensity of some identifiable emotional state? Or how do you measure the exact quantity of knowledge that one has acquired? So these things are still kind of loosey-goosey, but nonetheless, you can see how they relate qualitatively.
Well, thank you everyone for that understanding of systems thinking, because I think when you add the S there, Sam, it makes a lot more sense. The patterns connecting.
By the way, one of the
And
ways
then-
that sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say how we have to stop at some amount of patterns and do some sort of quantitative analysis, because the patterns can go on forever, especially when I get into sacred geometry. Those patterns are unlimited.
They can
Literally
become
infinite.
bewildering. Some patterns
Yep.
are bewildering.
Yep. The tree of life literally goes on in sacred geometry. You can keep those circles going infinitely out. And you could extrapolate so many patterns that you would never end.
Can I mention something that could spark another debate about mathematics and spirituality? Because you've got something in mathematics called magical numbers. Magical numbers that are in certain kinds of mathematics, like algebra, geometry or something. There's magical numbers in fractal geometry.
What's the
And-
definition of magical that you're using, Alex?
It's imaginary numbers.
Okay, that's
They
not
use it-
magical. Those are imaginary. Those are different.
Yeah, okay. Well, in spirituality, you've got imaginary friends in heaven.
It's a very different definition of imaginary.
Yes.
Well, that-
Imaginary
that's
in
what-
mathematics has nothing to do with mystical.
That's
Yeah.
what I'd like to have cleared up. That
Nothing to do with mystical. Nothing.
you got
It's just an
two methods.
orthogonal. It's just an orthogonal dimension to quote unquote real numbers. That's all.
Right.
Well, a slight variation in an equation, especially in algebra, can give you extremely different results. Different results at either end of the spectrum by changing a tiny, minute number, like chaos theory,
Yeah, that's chaos theory. That's
the
small
butterfly
perturbations
effect.
generate gigantic effects. Yes.
And so, if you're using magic numbers, what they call them, they're not really magic numbers, are they, Sam? They're
You mean imaginary numbers?
Yeah, it's a different thing. It's not connected with superstition or imaginary fantasies. It's based
No,
on some
no.
kind of algebra.
It's a convenient way to deal with oscillations. Whenever you have something that's oscillating, one of the powerful tools is to employ imaginary numbers to deal with
Okay.
sinusoidal oscillations. It's just a
Yeah.
very, very convenient
Yeah, I
technical
get that.
approach to notation.
See, this
Well,
is why words are dangerous if you don't really understand their true definition. Okay, if science uses the word quantum, and then somebody in, let's say, popular journalism uses the word quantum to talk about, oh, well,
Quantum leap.
therefore you don't really know how someone thinks, or you don't really know where something's going to be, and therefore now they extrapolate like crazy, nonsensically, stupidly. It's a very dangerous way
Yeah.
for that interpretation to affect people's lives. And that's the gobbledygook that this forum is trying to cut through. This is why this Sunday forum was created. Over.
I'll give you an example. If you put an oscillating voltage into a resistor, the current and the voltage are in phase, and you will actually heat up the resistor. But if you put it into a capacitor, then the current and the voltage are out of phase, and you won't put any energy into the capacitor. It'll go in and come back out, go in and come back out. So you're not heating up the capacitor. So imaginary numbers allow you to determine the real energy from the energy that's not real. It's just a sloshing energy.
What word could you use instead of imaginary for those
What
numbers?
word would you use? Well, that's the word that was coined. I don't know. I mean,
It's
orthogonal.
defined.
You could simply say orthogonal or out of phase. You could say 90 degrees out of phase, but then nobody's going to know what you're talking about.
What about placebo numbers?
No, it's a clear definition.
No.
It's been there for hundreds of years. There's no real need to define it. There's a
Numbers that are
need to
not really
teach it.
numbers.
There's a need for people to understand it. Just because people don't understand it doesn't mean we have to redefine it. That's backwards.
It comes out of the square root of -1. And the square root of -1 is not a real number, so it's called an imaginary number. That's just whoever came up with defining a symbol for the square root of -1, they called it the letter I for imaginary. They could have called it something else. I don't know. But when you have a baby, you got to give it a name. It's
When
like
would you need-
Idaho.
Where in mathematics would you ever need the square root of -1?
Everywhere. It's
Everywhere.
ubiquitous. Anytime
Everywhere.
anytime you have oscillations, you need them. Well, you don't need them, but the thing is, you can't. It's hard to do the math without the convenience of using imaginary numbers. If you study electrical engineering and AC circuits, they're just the standard way to do the math. There's no other easy way to do the math.
Look, even saying that it's
The
not
little
real
girl
is
in
a
the picture.
misunderstanding of it, okay? It's as real as engineering is real, okay? In other words, it's only imaginary in the sense that when you count things, you don't use I. That's all.
Yeah.
In all
Well,
other
that's like-
respects, it's quite real.
That reminds me of the people who said, show me where's God in the universe, and I'll point to the picture on the Bible, and I'll say, there's God. I've seen it on a book cover, and also I've also seen the word God in a dictionary. So it does exist. And yet they think you're talking about an imaginary friend who exists in the clouds when you're talking about God. Something that doesn't exist, and yet
Bye-bye.
the word exists. The culture exists on this planet in lots of different. There's hundreds of different gods.
No, the difference is when people start ascribing properties to whatever they're pointing at, okay? And saying, believe this. There's so much fallacy there that it's hard to know where to get started.
This is the problem with mathematics, is that the names, the nomenclature of mathematics, the words that they use, integral, differential, whatever you like, square root, for most people, these words are just words that are free floating. They don't have any real meaning. And unless you study the mathematics, you don't even know what these words mean. Quantum, I mean, people pick up the word quantum and they just use it,
Yeah, it's a very small gap. A quantum leap is a very tiny, minute leap, and yet
We already had a word for that. It was infinitesimal.
a lot of journalists go off the deep end thinking they
Leibniz
made a
and Newton
quantum
had
leap.
infinitesimal. That's a very small gap.
Yeah.
So, quantum and infinitesimal are really synonyms, except that they're used in separate disciplines. And so they have one meaning in physics and another meaning in mathematics. So they could have used the same word. It wouldn't have been a problem to use the same word.
How often have you heard a respected mainstream journalist say, we've just made a quantum leap in technology?
Yeah, which is the smallest possible leap, which is so small you can't even see it.
Insignificant.
Yeah.
Always makes me chuckle.
Or what is a quantum of solace?
Quantum of solace. The world's tiniest violin playing what is that? I have, what is it? What's the phrase? I can't remember now though.
Anyway, thanks for touching on a lot of these topics. Barry, I always enjoy these conversations. I think the participation from Heiner, Josh, Alex, it is a real opportunity to really experiment with how we keep focus on these conversations and really bring it back to why this forum exists. So
Yeah.
if
yeah.
you notice part of what I do, it's because I'm trying to make sure that that original motivation for these forums is still respected.
Super.
All right.
See ya.
That's my checkout. Talk to you guys next time.
Talk to you next time.
Bye-bye.